In this video, we're going to be talking about why you can't touch your toes, what it means for your body, the benefits you're missing out on, and whether it's worth it for you to try to touch your toes. And if you do decide that you want to try to touch your toes, what is the likely outcome of your efforts? We're going to talk about it all in this video, so if you're ready, let's get ready to think right, move right, and feel right. First of all, let's get real. A lot of people watching this video who can't touch their toes are men. Are there women who can't touch their toes? Yes, but a lot more women are able to just touch their toes without any big fuss than men. A lot of men have trouble even getting past midpoint on their shins. But whether you're a man or a woman, the reason you can't touch your toes is still actually the same. It all comes down to RPP, or repeated position practice. This means that the positions you practice repeatedly get easier and easier. Women in general tend to be more flexible. Their bodies tend to be more flexible in general. And that makes a lot of sense because women actually have to allow their pelvis to bust open to push a baby out if they so choose. Meanwhile, men just have to be super tough and strong and play with garbage trucks and hunt down wild boars. But whether you're a man or a woman, if you can't touch your toes, it still comes down to whether or not you've actually practiced going into a position where you're forward folding and trying to touch your toes or the ground or your garbage truck or your lunch. So if you look back on your life, you may realize that you really haven't been doing anything on a daily, weekly, or even yearly basis to try to fold forward and let your hips get into deep flexion so that you can touch your toes or the floor. Many females actually participate in hobbies like dance or gymnastics where they practice going into deep, highly mobile, highly flexible positions. This means that women who are naturally more flexible are often also practicing this forward fold position more often than males. If you're a guy, the last time you probably tried to do a forward fold was in the 3rd grade, and after that, it was really uncool to even try. There was also that one time in high school where you tried to touch your toes, but you and all your friends were on enough psychedelic mushrooms to down a horse. Of course, if you're a guy who is in gymnastics, none of this applies to you, and you're probably still flexible enough to touch your toes. The only downside is you probably had to deal with a lot of teasing and name calling and ignorant epithets when you were younger. But now, if you're over 25 and you can still touch your toes, everybody admires your poise, posture, and physical prowess. And I'm pretty sure more women and men would like to mate with you rather than the guy who can't even tie his own shoes. In short, our modern lives basically put everything within easy reach, so we never have to reach down and pull something out of the ground like, I don't know, food? If anything, it's a once or twice a year occurrence where you actually have to pick something up off of the floor while keeping your knees straight and your spine in a fairly neutral position. You basically live your entire life in a chair, whether it's in your car, at the office, at your home office, or on your couch watching TV. This kind of RPP leads to atrophy in your hip and leg muscles and in your spinal muscles. You're no longer able to coordinate a motion and a position that is basic and fundamental to human life. Your muscles in your brain no longer know how to get you in and out of a forward fold position. So even if your life depended on it, you couldn't touch the ground. So now that all your muscles are frozen into this limited range of motion, how do you fix it? Hey, I want to say a huge thanks to Carolyn, Cindy, and C. Cho for the generous $50 donations from each one of you. I really appreciate your support of the Upright Health channel. And if you're watching this and you want to support this channel too, use the thanks button or the PayPal link in the description box. Now let's get back to it. First of all, some people will say that you can't fix it, and these people are well-intentioned, but they should know better. Doctors, physical therapists, and personal trainers will tell you that, hey, your bone shapes are not meant for you to touch your toes because your legs are too long, your shins are too long, or you're European, or you're not European, or you're Asian, or you're not Asian, or you're too tall, or you're too short, or you're too old, or you're too young. Some very well-intentioned researchers will take x-rays of people's femurs and tibias and say, well, based on the proportions, it's actually physically impossible for you to bend enough to touch the ground. Which brings us to the physically feeble fallacy. The physically feeble fallacy comes in a number of forms. Some of the most common versions of the physically feeble fallacy are the following. Well, I can't do it, so nobody else can. I tried and failed, so I'm pretty sure this is genetically impossible for me and anyone like me. And my absolute favorite is, I'm a medical or other health professional and I can't do it, so it's actually unhealthy for you and nobody should try doing it. The physically feeble fallacy happens all the time. You may hear it from trainers, you may hear it from doctors, you may hear it from gym rats who are super buff and are convinced that the reason they can't touch their toes has nothing to do with the fact that they've never trained mobility in their lives and have spent all their hours in their gym just stiffening up their hamstrings. And when we're talking about x-rays, let's remember that x-rays are just a snapshot, and snapshots don't tell you about physical movement capability. That's like saying you take an x-ray of me like this, of my head and my humerus, this arm bone, and you look at that x-ray and you say, well, the reason you have headaches is because your humerus and your skull are growing together. It's some sort of weird congenital defect. Snapshots of your bones do not tell you what your movement capabilities are going to be. The things that move your bones are your muscles. Your muscles are the things that you need to measure and gauge, and the best, most obvious, clear, low-tech way to challenge and test your muscles is to try different movements. If you can't perform a movement, then you know that the muscles are not able to move the bones where you want them. Quick correction here, my actual personal favorite excuse for not being able to touch your toes is, I'm too tall. If you're over 5'3", there's no way you can touch your toes. This is my all-time favorite excuse for not being able to touch your toes because it means that person actually believes that only your legs grow longer once you reach a certain height. And then the image of somebody being 6 feet tall whose torso is the same proportion as somebody who's 5 feet tall but has really long legs is just a hilarious Dr. Seuss-like illustration in my mind.
I cannot touch my feet. I cannot find a fitting pant.
Anyway, the point here is that muscles control bone position. So if you want bone position to change and you want your bones to be able to configure themselves in a certain way, you need to train muscles to get used to that. You need to get your brain to know which muscles need to fire, and the muscles need to get strong enough and flexible enough to allow it. Which brings us to the big point, ATM, always think muscles. Instead of wasting your time coming up with all kinds of excuses about genetics and how hard it is and how difficult it is, you ATM and work to train your muscles. You want to build strength at every length. You want to train certain muscles to be stronger when shorter. You want to train certain muscles to be stronger when they're longer. And if at the end of this video you feel like you too want to train to touch your toes, then I will be linking to a video at the end that'll help you do exactly that. But first, let's talk about whether or not it's worth training to touch your toes. What are the benefits and what's going to happen if you actually try to touch these toes? The most obvious benefit is going to be a reduced risk of back injury. The reason doctors often say you should bend your knees to try to pick things up is because so many people lack the basic function of being able to fold at the hips while keeping the spine straight to pick something up off of the floor. Instead, because your hamstrings are so stiff, you often just bend your spine and curl, and these small muscles along your spine are not able to create the same amount of force, the same amount of strength that your hamstrings can express, and these back muscles don't have the same awesome leverage that the hamstrings have at the bottom of the pelvis. These little back muscles just can't do the same work, and when you push them too hard, too fast, or with too much load, then you strain those back muscles or you slip a disc. Gah! Holy fudgesicle! If you're able to lengthen and strengthen your hamstrings so that you can go down here with a nice neutral spinal position, you'll be able to pick stuff up safely and easily without worrying about your spine. The second most obvious benefit of training to be able to touch your toes is you'll be able to put on your own shoes and tie your own shoes. You'll be able to tie your own shoes. You'll be able to tie your own shoes yourself and function like a normal human being who can hinge at the hips and do this simple forward fold. If you look at societies where people are not constantly bound to a desk or to a chair or to a couch or to a car, you'll notice that human beings are actually able to do work in the hinge for long periods of time. They can farm, they can gather, they can hang out, they can have their lunch, they can snack, they can tend to a baby, they can tend to the piglets that the big pig just gave birth to. They can probably think of more realistic and relatable examples. The point is that if you learn to touch your toes, you will re-achieve what is actually very normal primal human function. If you have kids of your own or a nephew or a niece or grandkids, you'll be able to play with them and help them pick up toys and stuff without grunting like a wild Canadian boar. And I guarantee kids will find you a lot more fun if you aren't constantly whining about how your back hurts or your whatever hurts.
I'm sorry, little guy, but I have a bad back. The third big benefit is you're going to have a totally new perspective on life.
What the? How long has this been here? You'll see just how malleable your body really is, and you'll see how what passes for truth in the medical world is actually just a fog of myths. This fog of myths just hides professionalized ignorance, and it limits you from the physical and mental development that is your birthright. So what's going to happen if you start trying to touch your toes? First, you're going to encounter difficulty because it is rarely easy, especially if you're an adult and you can't already touch your toes. There is definitely going to be discomfort, so be prepared for that. The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to come up with a lot of excuses internally for why you can't do this. Any and all of the excuses that I talked about earlier in this video are going to start to sound really good to you, and you're going to look for ways to back that up with some kind of evidence. You're going to go on Google and you're going to find somebody who has a lot of initials behind their names and looks like they have a reasonably credible website. And then you're going to look at their site and you're going to find something that says, hey, don't worry if you can't touch your toes. It just means you're genetically defective. In other words, it's not your fault.
Sorry, little guy, it's not my fault. It's your grandparents' fault.
And if it's really late at night, you're probably going to cut and paste that passage in the comment section and then say, look, you're wrong, Matt, you're wrong. This guy with a lot of initials says that it's genetic. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. If you do post that down there, I'm going to know you didn't watch this whole video. And just to be clear, I don't care. But the truly dedicated out there are going to silence those inner voices, that monkey mind that's telling you that this is impossible and you'll never be able to do it. You will remember to ATM and keep training your muscles so that you're able to get into a nice forward fold position. Soon you'll be reaping the benefits of having a body that allows you to hinge and allows you to live in a nice deep forward fold. So now if you've watched this whole video and you're convinced that you want to try to do a forward fold so you can touch your toes, then check out these videos that I'm going to link right here. If you want to support this channel, use the thanks button or the PayPal link that you'll find in the description box. I promise I will not spend your money on an endless stream of massages trying to loosen up my hamstrings. Subscribe with notifications on.
And as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't.